This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo. Recording this late in October, and it's getting a little cool in Tokyo, but not too bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, actually. Things have kind of started to go my way, likewise, after what, 48 years, 47 years?
So about time. Huh?
Yeah, I'm happy for that.
All right, that's good. So this time we've just got one comic to talk about, and then I have some announcements, you could say, or just some discussion about life and podcasting, you could say. So, first of all, we have 2 issues of a book called Chad in Amsterdam, and this is written by Chad, I don't know how to pronounce it, Bilyeu, Bilyeu. And he's a guy from Cleveland who's living in Amsterdam and doing a comic about his life there, or at least, writing it. He has a variety of artists doing the various stories in these 2 issues. And I mean, that's a whole topic in itself, his artists. But first I want to read the email from Chad when he sent these. Good day. My name is Chad Bilyeu. I'd like to first thank you all for your wonderful podcasts. I really enjoyed the Ho-Che Anderson, Miracle Man, and Cerebus episodes, none of which I was in. I'll be delving into more in the future. I'm an American writer and photographer who has been living in Amsterdam for about 9 years. I'm currently working on a comic book series based both upon my life in Amsterdam and the rarer facets of the city. I write the stories and get different artists to illustrate the scripts in black and white art. I'm sending you the first issue and the advance copy of the second issue for review consideration. And he gave links, and these are both available on Comixology, I found. As you would guess, these are pretty much nonfiction stories about Amsterdam and about things that have happened to him living in Amsterdam, things that he's done, and so forth. And sometimes the stories have kind of a nice kind of punchline, not exactly a joke, but like this feels like the end, and then sometimes they just sort of end, and didn't really kind of wrap up. It was just sort of like, okay, this is kind of where we cut the film, but I didn't really mind that because I thought the stories were entertaining, and they give you a feeling of living in Amsterdam, and of course we're also living outside of the U.S. Where we were born, and so even though Holland is much different from Japan, I feel kind of an affinity of an American living abroad. Well, before we get to the art, let's talk. I want to get your take on the writing here.
My take?
Yes.
I really, really liked his voice. It was clear, it was present, and it was kind of purposeful in not in that it always went for the same thing in every story, but I found myself after a while beginning to trust the writer. Not only for his writing, but also for his choice of artists. The artists were all excellent, and they all added to the story in their visual style and representation. Even though they are drawing him, he is identifiable as him, even though the styles are completely different. I don't I don't know Amsterdam. Um, I've never been I've never been there. I only know what I heard in that Tarantino movie so many years ago, which he actually references later. But one of the things is, I mean, there are some people who write a bit of an afterword in their comics, and generally I skip that because I am not interested in reading some lengthy bit of whatever at the end of a comic. I'm just there for the comic, and I'm out. But I found with this one, I was genuinely curious about what he had to say. So in the first issue, at least, I didn't quite have time for the second issue, but for the first issue, I read it from front to back and thoroughly enjoyed everything he had to say, especially retrofitted, which is prose only with a photograph, and I guess about his student dormitory, but or student housing, but just kind of in general.
Yeah, well, why he moved to Amsterdam and
yeah. And of all the stories, I kind of enjoyed that one the most, even though it's not comics, because I just enjoyed his voice. There was something about it that just really struck me, and it could be the fact that he, like the both of us, left America and went somewhere else, and was not a tourist about it, but immigrated, and is now kind of dealing with a lot of the things that we deal with in Japan, inclusion or exclusion from social groups in the country, the host country. There is one point where he talks about the only time a black or brown person is considered from Holland is when they're scoring a goal. And that I found to be very true here. I think it there's always a kind of an acceptance here with an explanation of why this person is accepted as a Japanese citizen. I think a little bit more so than just this person represents this country, regardless of the color of their skin. Japan is not as diverse as he makes Holland out to be, or at least Amsterdam.
Yeah.
But there are. I feel there is more variety of ethnic group here than there was in San Francisco, where I grew up. Even though, well, I don't know, it's kind of weird because in Tokyo, in such a large city, it's a kind of a small percentage, but they stick out because the concentration of Japanese people is so heavy. So if you're from the Middle East or from Africa, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. But in America, maybe not so much. But anyway, to sum up about the writing, I enjoyed it very, very much, and I would like to know what he's doing and what he's interested in future editions.
Yeah. Okay. Now about the art. First of all, I'm curious as to why he changes artists a lot. I mean, it could be because nobody's got the time to draw all his comics, or it could be because he wants to have a variety of artists, or maybe he feels like each artist's style fits the tone of a certain story. But you know, they're all really good artists.
Yeah.
And not just that, but so looking at in the first issue, there's a story. The PDF has the spread, so I guess it would be 4 pages in a printed comic. It's the one about the Indonesian restaurant
Yeah.
Sranang Makmur, and it's totally done in Chris Ware's style.
Mm.
And then it got me to thinking, I think some of the other stories in these two issues are also done in imitation of other better known artists, but I can't put my finger on them, and it's driving me crazy. Like,
Mm.
whose style is this? So in the second issue, there's a rather long story. Did you read the second issue?
Oh, yes, it did.
Okay, that first story about his bicycle getting impounded.
Yeah.
That style looks really familiar to me, but I can't put my finger on it.
Mm.
Although also I should mention that story kind of reminded me of you, because you had your bike stolen, which is a little bit different, but and you were going to do a comic about it.
Well, I'm still going to do the comic about it. It'll come eventually, but
Uh-huh.
these things got to gestate with me for 10 years. But yeah, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, my comic was, or my bicycle wasn't stolen by the police. It was stolen by some rando who left it at the station. But um, yeah, the style does look familiar, but um, stylistically, it seems kind of complete. So if it is in fact biting another artist, it's done well. It's not just adapting parts of it and kind of falling down on the other parts. It's actually aping it completely. If it is in fact aping, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But I mean, still, that's the way artists do.
Sure.
And those that we find original are just the ones that we don't know where they're biting their style from. I mean, Bill Zankiewicz was a Neil Adams clone when he started.
Hmm.
Look at the man now. Um,
Well, and from listening to something about the Beatles podcast, I've learned some of the things that even really late in the Beatles' career that were based on stuff that they heard other artists do. They weren't straight out of whole cloth sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
Did you notice? So the story after the Indonesia story, does it have a title? I guess it. I didn't quite understand the story. Something where he's at a bar and he's saying, "This is a Amsterdam situation."
Right.
Well, the interesting thing to me about this is, well, I happened to notice when the PDF was in the mode where, if you hit the down arrow, it jumps to the next page.
Hmm.
And the layout of the two pages is identical.
Hmm.
Uh, the first at the top, there's a panel that goes all the way across the page where he's at the bar, and then there are three small panels under that, and then another all the way across bar panel, and then two shots of his eyes, and then another bar panel again. And if you have the PDF in that mode and you arrow back and forth between the two pages, it looks a little bit like animation, because the backgrounds aren't moving. Just
Right.
the figures are moving within those same identical backgrounds.
Hmm.
And it's really interesting.
That is kind of curious. The comic is, I don't know. I think for me, I took it as just like a minor point of dissatisfaction where this person did not give him the service that was considered a standard for the area,
Yeah.
confirmed that she wasn't doing that, and left it there. I,
Hmm.
I'm not sure what to make of it beyond that, but I don't know. I sometimes when something like this happens in Tokyo, where I'm just like, is this person fucking with me because I'm not Japanese, or is there some other thing that I'm missing here? I'm not quite sure. And sometimes try to confirm that shit, but sometimes when you start speaking Japanese to Japanese people, they get a little weird about it and can't handle the fact that you're speaking to them in their own language, and like they get dumb. And sometimes they just like ignore that and try to speak to you in English, or somehow it gets weird. Maybe it's just weird for me. I don't know if you've had this experience, but it kind of reminded me of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess my anecdote would be that a long time ago when I was living in Shiga, I noticed that to ride from Osaka to Kyoto is a certain amount of money, like 400 yen. To ride from Kyoto to Shiga, where I lived, was another 400 yen. But the total cost of riding from Osaka to Shiga was like 850 yen or some shit like that. And I was like, what's with the other 50 yen? You're saying that if I actually get off the train at Kyoto, leave, and then re-enter the station and continue on my way, I'll save 50 yen. And the guy confirmed it for me. He said, yes, that is correct. Like, then why won't you just let me ride on for that one price? And he's like, because that's the way it is. And I said, man, you guys are fucking crooks. And he said, don't ride the train then. So I threw the money at him and walked away. But, I mean, it was in my youth. I got angry quite a bit. I was in my wasteful 20s. But basically, is basically confirming that, yes, they are ripping you off. Yes, there's nothing you can do about it. But because of the laws of supply and demand, they can demand whatever price they want, since Shiga is in the countryside and there are no other trains.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of feel this is the same.
Mm-hmm. I see. But yeah, so I mean, this is definitely worth taking a look at. I would recommend getting both issues if you can.
Oh, most definitely. Seeing there's something else I wanted to mention here, but nope, that's about it. Although I kind of curious what he would write as a fiction. Not that he should or must, but I'm just kind of curious, because with these anecdotes, the story is kind of there, and it's just your musings about the situation, and kind of package it, and that's the story. And I've done that with my own life in Tokyo, but making something that is not real. I'm kind of curious as to what he would make.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know what kind of fiction he would do.
Yeah. So anyway, Chad, if you're listening, please hit us up with a letter. Let us know if you have made or are interested in ever making. And when you do, or if you have, send us a comic.
Yeah. Okay, so we need to talk about, Mulele has talked about his life a number of times on the podcast. It's my turn, I guess. So, you've probably, as listeners, you've probably already noticed that I haven't had as much time to work on the podcast this year. There have been fewer episodes where I was anything beyond the sort of producer. I wasn't, reading the comic or reviewing it or interviewing people very much. So, I'm working as an ALT, an assistant language teacher, and I wasn't able to continue at the high school where I was last year, where I was working 3 days a week along with my own private students and some other small sources of income. But I had to switch to a 5-day-a-week job this year, and that's eaten up a fair bit of the time that I might have used to make podcasts in the past. And now on top of that, I'm going, well, between November and February, I'm going to be proofreading 4 books for a translation agency. They have translated the books from Japanese to English, and someone else will check the translation, and then I'm like the final check to see if they read smoothly or something sticks out as being weird. So that's going to keep me pretty busy for much of the next 4 months. There will be some breaks in there, but as the schedule currently stands anyway. My English study podcast, Machigai, is going to be in reruns because I feel like that one I need to have something out there because it has a lot more downloads than anything else I'm working on. Deconstructing Comics is just going to have to be on sort of a semi-hiatus for a while. I mean, if Kumar or somebody else does an episode, I'll put it up when I have time. And I do have about a month break between books in November, December, and I hope we can get to some more critiques. There are 3 more comics in the queue as it stands right now. But the other thing is, though, I also need to hunt for a job for next year because this year's job, it requires more work. It doesn't pay as well, if that makes any sense at all. But I was in a situation where I didn't have much choice. And then after I finish that last book in February, and school will finish up for me at the beginning of March, and then I'm planning to go home to Iowa for a few weeks to help with family stuff. So in the short term, there will be occasional episodes of Critiquing Comics or Deconstructing Comics, but it's not going to be an every week thing. And I don't know, there might be weeks on end when there's nothing, just so you can be expecting that. Now, as far as if anybody else is listening who is still hoping to get a critique from us, feel free to send it. It'll take a while to get to it, but we'll do our best to get to it as soon as we can. But yeah, it's going to take a while. It could be a few months from the time you send it to the time an episode goes up. Now, as of April, since I'm going to be job hunting, I don't know what my job situation will be exactly in April. But besides that, thinking longer term, I'm not sure what I want to do at that point. So this podcast, I've been a little frustrated with. Well, of course, as I've mentioned a number of times on the show, I was trying to make this into my main job, which might have, I don't know. I mean, you could say that was never going to happen, but some people do succeed at that in some ways, and I'm not sure exactly what's been keeping me from doing so. If it's circumstance, if it's something to do with me. I mean, one problem is that I've spread myself too thin. I think the people who succeed at it are focused on one podcast, where I've been doing 3. The Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics feed, Machigai podcast, and then To the Bat Poles.
That's 4.
Well, yeah, I guess if you count Critiquing as a separate podcast, then it is 4, but it's 3 feeds.
Okay.
And To the Bat Poles has been where my passion really has been recently. And I'd like to be doing a little more sort of research on Batman 66. And then I also have some life maintenance things that never get done, and also some other creative projects that never get done because I can't spread myself any thinner than I am. So I'm debating what to do after I get through with this proofreading job and the family stuff and the job hunting. So, and actually, I mean, on the other hand, it's kind of difficult to consider completely giving it up because, there's social aspect to it with you, with Kumar, with interviewees, with, at the comics events in Tokyo. And, I don't like kind of shutting all that down either. It might be something that I just have to move on from, or maybe I kind of get a second wind, more like maybe a fifth or sixth wind, because there have been other times when I've been sort of dragging on the podcast for a while and then kind of got some renewed energy on it later. But another idea, though, that I'm willing to consider if I find the right person would be to take on a new partner on the show, not just someone to do interviews and reviews, or maybe not even have to do that part of it at all, but who could handle some of the stuff that so far I've been handling completely by myself. The editing and production and publishing and whatever promotion there has been. And particularly if that person knew more about how to build the audience and bring in more income from the show, which is something I've been kind of struggling with. So if anyone wants to pitch me on some kind of proposal, mail at deconstructingcomics.com. I'm willing to consider it. Thoughts?
Well, for myself, I'm here just talking comics with my friend, and I can do that on the podcast or off, because we live in the same city. And if I don't get my Tim fix, I'll be knocking on your door to harass you for some face-to-face time. But
except you don't know where I live.
But it's true. But, I'll hunt you down somehow. But basically, for me, that's where it's at. I mean, if for example, to continue this podcast, you take a rest and then some other person comes in and we review comics together, I'm not really interested in that. I have other shit to do, and sometimes I'm actually really fucking busy. And so there are times like this week where I said, okay, I can't do it this week. Let's do it next week. And we moved it. But the thing is, reading these comics from people who hit up our podcast, a lot of the time there's something interesting about them. And I love the fact that for the most part, they are not mainstream books. They are independent things with wild ideas that sometimes work and sometimes don't. And I like talking about them with you. And so that's it. That's it for me.
Yeah, well, and I also feel like, we're providing kind of a rare service here. I mean, another podcast that I listen to that has a larger audience, one of the guys on that show said one time that, they get a lot of people who want them to read their comics, and, there's a time factor there, of course, but they're also just not really interested in setting a precedent there because they tend to be not very good comics, he said. And, not very many people are willing to do this, and especially, for free and,
yep.
Just, put out a podcast of it. But I think it's it's useful for people who maybe don't have anybody else to give them a halfway intelligent critique of their work. And yeah, I mean, they aren't always all bad. I mean, what do I want to say? Sometimes they are good. So I think it's worthwhile to do. And if it's not good or has some serious problems, I enjoy pointing out how they could fix it.
I have a slightly more romantic view of the comics that we review. In that this is kind of like direct-to-video market of the '80s. If you want to compare it to film,
because you always do compare it to film.
Yeah, of course I will. But I mean, there's a lot of schlock. There's a lot of like just weird stuff that sometimes you don't know how to take. Like, what was that one? Yiffing in Hell.
Oh yes, Yiffing in Hell.
And that one kind of sticks with me, not because it was good, but because it was just so fucking off the wall. But I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed hating that. That's what I should say. But it impresses me much more than some of the things that I've read from mainstream comics. And you know, I gave up on mainstream comics a long time ago, and have decided not to go back for anything, because at this point, it's just a machine that chugs along, and it will outlive me. And there's no need for me to invest in that. It'll be fine. But here, I can kind of feel the artist, even if I disagree with what they're doing. I can see a person there doing a thing to the best of their ability, and just trying to make something new. And I really appreciate that. Whereas the latest issue of Captain Marvel or Batman or whatever, I don't care. I mean, I may like a specific actor who plays a role in a film, or may like a certain artist that did a certain issue, but I'm just not impressed. In general, in like following a series of books that constantly changes artist or writer, and is kind of decided upon by committee. I want to get something a little bit more raw, where they will do shit or talk about shit that is kind of not family friendly, or unexpected, or punches its way through a mistake to something interesting. All of that's good. But yeah, that's what I feel about these comics that we get, is that there's something special, like the comics that we reviewed today. What was it, Chad, in Amsterdam?
Yeah.
They were, both of those comics were brilliant little gems, and there's real value there. And it actually makes me curious to go to Amsterdam. I want to check that out. I don't know if I'll ever get there, because, I usually take 20 years to do anything, but
Weird Crime Theater.
yeah, that one took what, 12 years, something like that. But anyway, the thing is, that kind of stuff is why I love doing indie comics, because there's no way you'll get that in a Marvel or DC comic.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said years ago that the idea of a person running around in their underwear is kind of done. I think it was like a late 90s, early 2000s kind of idea. And so suddenly the X-Men were in leather instead of the traditional spandex. But I still kind of believe that it's done. The costumes are bright and pretty, but aside from colorful fashion, I just don't think the underwear on the outside thing is a thing really. And I'm kind of tired of it. Although I am waiting for Avengers 4, so
You're tired of
yes.
it in comics form.
I kind of am. I kind of am. I think I enjoy the films from a filmic point of view, but sometimes the stories are kind of interesting. But it's very much a condensed thing compared to the comics, to the floppies and the trade paperbacks. And in that way, I feel like I'm getting the best of what they have to offer, rather than some long drawn out shit that took 10 years to kind of get through. And yeah, some people may be like screaming at their listening device right now, telling me I'm wrong. But anyway, that's just how I feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't read as much Marvel as I used to. I read a little bit. I mean, I also just don't read as many comics as I used to because I'm, again, spreading myself too thin. And also, finances are an issue. And if I can't get it electronically, I'm less likely to buy it because I've got a storage problem.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but yeah, I mean, it's nice to get these comics for critique and see something different, something that I probably wouldn't have known about otherwise.
Yeah. That's I think what it is. There's not enough different in the mainstream comics, I feel. There's nothing unexpected.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, one of the things I've been finding more and more, especially with the whole Star Wars thing, that whole drama over whether Episode 8 was good or bad or what the fuck happened to Solo, um, more than the movies themselves, I am enjoying the drama that they create between the fans and the creators. That is the story for me. And so I'll watch the movie just so I can keep up on the actual story. Um, will the producer of Star Wars be fired or not? Uh, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, I think that whole thing with Captain America that happened a year or two ago, where he was a secret Hydra agent.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that the the idea that Marvel wanted to get comic book store owners to wear Hydra shirts while they sell the comic, not understanding that some of those store owners are Jewish and Hydra is basically an offshoot of the Nazis. That kind of shit blows my mind. It is funny and tragic and just I want to scream every time I think about that, but at the same time, man. Um, and the whole run was so ridiculous and so bad that the head of Marvel had to step down. They replaced him with some guy who had a fucking scandal on his first day. Um, that whole mess, and I'm sure there's more, but I'm not quite caught up on my episodes yet. But just all of that stuff I found hilarious, and I enjoyed that side of the comic stuff. But the actual stories they produce, whatever.
So they should put out a comic about themselves. That'd be more interesting.
It would be much more interesting, yeah. I would love to see something like that, but um, I don't think I'm going to see that. They're
No,
they're
probably not.
they're too much about the product and not enough about themselves, whereas the comics we read are very much about themselves, and the product is also about themselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so like I said, we will accept more critique comics, but it'll be a little while before we get to them. But if you'd like to send a comic, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we will read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show at some point in the future.
Also, just to kind of cut in, if anybody out there is listening has an opinion on Tim's semi-retirement from podcasting, or pullback, or whatever you want to call it, send in a letter. Tell us what you think. If you, not just if you want to take over the show, but what is your opinion about Tim stepping back? Does the podcast mean anything for you? Is there any point to him like fighting through sleepless nights to get the podcast out just to make sure that people have something to listen to every week? I'm also very curious.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to hear too. We haven't gotten all that much feedback, so I'm really interested in hearing what listeners think of critiquing comics and deconstructing comics.
Actually, deconstructing comics, I don't care. Just comics. Yeah, I mean that other one has nothing to do with me at this point. So,
well, I mean you are a co-founder, you, me, and Brandon. But yeah, you haven't actually been on it in quite a while.
Yeah, I kind of branched off onto this one, and I'm quite content here. The other one can kind of fall in the ocean for all that I'm a part of it. But,
except when I talk to you at Kai Guy.
Well, I mean those are like special interviews, right?
Right. Yeah, exclusive interview with
Mulele. No, that I think every time I'm on this podcast, it's an exclusive interview. I don't think I do other podcasts, but for me, it's just about this one podcast, and the thing of it being that this podcast, like you said earlier, is unique. Not so many places review for free and critically independent comics, amateur comics, any comics that come through the pipeline that are not mainstream Marvel or have some big draw. So I mean, I've said in the past, and I kind of shy away from saying it too often, but it is kind of a resource, and I would hate for it to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the idea of having another person who could do the production would, it would be possible for me to do critiquing comics and just record it and then hand it off to somebody else to finish the job. So it would save me a lot of time in that way.
So are you just looking for an editor?
Well, potentially. I mean, that would certainly help, but also, if they have, like I said, some idea about building an audience, that would also be of interest to me. They don't need to appear on the show at all if they don't want to.
Okay, so there it is. You're looking for an editor and someone to do marketing. Pro bono.
Well, and of course, if they can help make money, then they can share in that, but...
Okay.
But, I'm not making any money, so...
I'm not making money.
No. I mean, we've got the Patreon, but at this point, the Patreon is primarily to the Batpoles Patreon, because that's, most of the people giving to it are to the Batpoles listeners. Well,
then there it is. Yeah. To the Batpoles has a paying fan base, but deconstructing and critiquing don't.
Yeah, pretty much.
But not so much about that, but just in general, what you're looking for is someone to help with those two specific things. And if you're a listener and you have an idea for for marketing, branding, or just how to deal with the editing stuff, even if you don't want a job doing this, then send us an email.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
No, man, I'm pretty much good for this week.
Okay. So this is coming out on November 5th, and I do hope we'll have another critiquing or two in December with those other comics that are in the queue. So, till next time, this is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.